So as I said, we're in John chapter 12, and it worked out good for me because as we get to John 12, we're running into the story of Mary and Martha. And I don't know, the scripture never talks about Mary and Martha being mothers. I'm just assuming that given the culture that they were in and the way things were at that time, chances are that they either grew up to be mothers or they were mothers. I'm not going to comment too much on that because there's nothing in scripture that implies that. But I started playing into this idea that we learn so much from the women that are put into our lives. And I thought about my mom and everything my mom ever taught me. And just like all of you, my mom taught me so much. But really, she taught me how to love my family because that's what my mom did. She took care of her family. And so I learned that from my mom. We can learn so much from these women that God has placed in our lives. From my own wife, who's a great mom, I get to learn what it's like to have this unconditional love for people that don't deserve it. I mean, how do you be a third grade teacher and you got kids and just craziness and yet she still loves all her kids and then has energy enough to come home and take care of her own teenagers, which I thought would be easier as they grew up, but no, you just lose all control and replace it with worry. And so being a mom of teenagers isn't easy either. And but I get to learn from her and the example that she sets, because sometimes we learn so much from the women that God places in our lives. And even January brought up her own mom. And from her, I can see what redemption really means because of the things that she's overcome. And as you talk to her, without question, she is going to tell you that Jesus is her number one priority, and that without him, she would be nowhere. And so, it to me is a testament in the story of redemption. We learn so much from the women that God has placed in our lives, whether they're your mother or someone else's mother, or just like an adopted mother, you just take her on. Like Steve, I know she's yours, but I've kind of adopted Connie, and I've adopted Kathy, and they both, no, don't do that to me. I'm like, Steve, you got to accept me as a brother in Christ. But I learned so much from these people who have. They may not be my own mom, but they show me godly examples. There's so much to learn, and I think as we look at Mary and Martha, although again we don't know if they were ever moms, and that's not really the point. What I'm trying to say here is that they set a godly example. They're two women who show us what it really means to honor Jesus. And that's what their story is ends up being about. Whether you read their story in Mark or Matthew or parts of it in Luke, or if you read it in John, it's all pointing to the same thing. In fact, Mary is one of my favorites because every time you see Mary, do we know where she's at? She's at Jesus' feet. What an example of what it means to honor Jesus, given to us by a woman, somebody who we can look up to and see what it's like to honor Jesus. And so when we get to chapter 12, we get to see what it's like to honor Jesus, but we get to see what it's like to honor Jesus in times of trial, right? Because there's lots that is going on to get us to this point, right? You remember from last week in chapter 11, we talked about Jesus miraculously raising Lazarus from the grave, right? He says, move the stone, and he says, Lazarus come out. And guess what? Lazarus comes out. And I like how the NIV puts it, the dead man came out walking. No longer dead, right? He's alive and he's coming out. And this is all a sign that proves Jesus' statement that he is the resurrection or the life. Or as he says, that I am resurrection and life. That resurrection and life. Now, anybody who believes in him will never die. There's this idea that because we have Jesus, we have life, a reconnection, a communion with the Father that was lost as we were kicked out of the garden, perhaps. But you can see even in that story that there's a little bit of conflict or apprehension that's starting to come to the Jews because of the Jews, and the disciples are starting to worry about Jesus going around Jerusalem. And just a couple of scriptures I'm going to point to. This is in chapter 11 that show this. Verse 8, the disciples say, but Rabbi, a short while ago the Jews were trying to stone you, and you want to go back? There's this sense that this if you go back to Jerusalem, Jesus, you're not going to get away with it this time. Things are starting to wrap up. Again, in verse 16, you know that guy we always call Doubting Thomas? Because maybe, he's always doubting, right? Well, check this out. Look at what he says. Verse 16, then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said, to the rest of the disciples, let us go that we may die with him. Maybe instead of calling Thomas doubting Thomas, maybe we should call him courageous Thomas. Because out of all the disciples, he's ready to go and face the Jews and die with Jesus. But there is a sense that if Jesus returns to Jerusalem, this is going to be the last time he gets to go there. And in fact, after the miracle of raising Lazarus, the chief priests, in verse 47 of chapter 11, the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin, and they said, "What are we accomplishing?" They asked. "Here's this man performing many signs, and if we let him go like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away our temple and our nation." There's this real fear that if Jesus becomes more popular, that it's going to start a revolt. And the Jewish people, they don't want this to happen. And so they make up their mind to go after Jesus. In fact, Caiaphas, and this is something John does a lot, like he uses somebody that is like saying something in ignorance to say a great truth. So Caiaphas, who's a high priest, says this: "You know nothing at all. You do not realize it's better for one man to die for the people than the whole nation to perish." Like he says that in verse 49 of chapter 11. All this is leading to set the scene for what's going to happen inside of this dinner, because you have to know what the feelings and the emotion is like as they come together for this dinner to honor Jesus. See, in chapter 12, verse 1, it says, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. I went through all those verses just to show you, like, this is a dinner, but it's not like this celebration dinner. I mean, maybe there was some celebrating going on. I mean, heck, if I had dinner with Jesus, I'd want to celebrate that. But ultimately, the temperature of the room, the what's in the air around Jesus is that Passover is coming. It's 6 days away. Jesus knows what's waiting for him. And if you follow the synoptic gospel, he's been telling the disciples that, Jesus he's going to go and he's going to die, and then he's going to, and he's talking to the disciples about what's waiting for him. So the temperature inside of this room as Jesus is going to this dinner in which he's going to be honored is a sense of maybe dread, maybe worry. I don't want to say fear. I mean, how could you be afraid if you just saw Lazarus raised from the grave? Like, I don't know that they were afraid, but they knew, like, this is going to be a confrontation. They don't know how it's going to work, but this dinner that they're having is an opportunity to honor Jesus because they know something big is going to happen. Something big is coming upon him. And that's what the dinner's all about, is honoring Jesus. And that word for honor is like reverence, right? And so I began to question, like, what does it mean to show reverence to Jesus? And I think both Martha and Mary, is going to show us what it means to show reverence. They're going to be examples of two godly women who show us how to be devoted to Jesus and how to honor Jesus. Now, the next couple stories, too, are going to show us what it's like to be a disciple, laying things down at the feet. As Jesus comes on a donkey, you're going to see Jesus washing feet. The next few chapters is going to be like, okay, now that Jesus' death is approaching, what does it mean to be a disciple? And what do you know? The first couple people that are going to show us true devotion and true discipleship and what it means to honor Jesus is Martha and Mary, two great women that show us what it's like to be a disciple. And so I'm going to show you the first thing, the first example. And the first example is just two words. It's really easy to figure out. My first point is Martha's service honored Jesus. And now you see that in verse 2. It says, here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Mary served. Like, what did she do to honor Jesus? You can all say it. Mary served. Two words, and we got it figured out, right? Mary served. And this was really true to Mary's character. No, I got this all wrong. I can always tell. Angela gives me a look when I say the wrong word. This is Martha. Martha served. Now, you can't blame me too much for getting the name wrong because, let's be honest, most of the story is going to be about Mary. And besides, they sound so similar. Like, if I was a parent, I would have changed that up so I didn't get it mixed up. But Martha serves. That's how she honors Jesus. Martha serves in order to honor Jesus. And that's true to her character. When we see her in Luke chapter 10, you're going to see her, guess what? Serving. In fact, let's read it real quick. In Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 40, it says, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, they came to this village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he said, but Martha was distracted with all the preparations that had been made. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister had left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. So I'm not saying that Martha served without ever complaining about it, by the way. I'm not saying that Martha served without ever hoping that other people would join along so that she didn't have to do all this work by herself. If you've ever served, you kind of know that that's not how it's like. You can serve with a joyful heart while still wishing other people would join in, right? But the point is that in order to honor Jesus, Martha served. She waited tables. That word for served is the verb form of like deacon or minister, right? Like that's what Martha's doing. She's serving, she's waiting tables, and she's doing that in a culture where service wasn't very dignified, right? In the Roman culture, like people were born to rule and not to serve. And so there was the servant class, and they were thought of as less than in many ways. But Jesus flips that around, right? And Martha is the first one to show us this idea that to really honor Jesus, you serve. Jesus flips it around in Luke chapter 22, and he talks about what it's like in his kingdom, right? His kingdom's different than the world's kingdom. It's almost upside down. If the world believes that the greatest in the world's kingdom is the king, the one in authority, Jesus flips that upside down and says, no, the greatest is the one who serves. Let's look at it. In Luke chapter 22, verse 25 through 27, there's this example of the difference. Jesus said to them, the king and the generals lord it over them, and those who exercise authority over themselves as benefactors. But you are not to be like that. Instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. You see what it's like to honor Jesus? It's not about being number one. It's not about being the most important in the room. It's not about being the ruler. It's about being the one who serves, the one who sweeps the floor, the one that vacuums. Thank you, Craig and John. And the one that does the bathrooms, like thank you, Ruth. This idea that it's about service. And when you serve, like you're honoring Jesus. And you may think it doesn't seem like much, but here I am, 2,000 years later, talking about the fact that Martha served. And that's what it is to honor Jesus. It's that simple. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to have the most talent. You have to just be willing to say, what can I do? What tables can I wait? Right? So Martha serves, and that's how she honors Jesus. But that's not really the main point of this text. And so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time there because it's really about what Mary does that is pretty awesome. And so my second point is that Mary's perfume honored Jesus. Right? So we do get to learn from women. The first woman that we learn this great truth is from Martha. And Martha honors Jesus by serving. The second woman that we learn from is Mary, and she honors Jesus by pouring out her perfume. And this happens in verse 3. Look at what happens. Then Mary took about a pint. A pint is like a half of a liter. Took about a pint of pure nard, of an expensive perfume, and she poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Like that's what Mary did in order to honor Jesus. Martha serves, and Mary takes this really expensive perfume out and pours it out on Jesus' feet. Now, there's the Synoptic Gospels has a story that's very similar to this, and many people believe it's the same story, but there's differences in it, so some people think it might have been two different times. I'm not going to get into that. The point is that during the same week of Jesus' life, there's another story in Mark 14 of a woman who has an alabaster jar full of perfume, the same kind of perfume that Mary has, by the way, who breaks it open and pours it on his head. And then it goes down. If this is the same story, then we see Mary coming in and pouring it over his head and it going down his gown and onto his feet. Like she is giving up something very precious to pour on Jesus. And the fragrance of that fills the entire room.
Like it's this beautiful idea. And there's some things about this perfume that we should probably talk about. It's a pint, right? A pint is a half of a liter. Do you guys use perfume? My kids are getting to be teenagers, and they're getting better at like using cologne. But like you just need a spray, like just a spray, and then just walk through it, right? Sometimes like one of them who's not here tonight will come out smelling like, oh man, like would you dump the whole bottle on yourself, right? And but this is a half of a liter. Like a half of a liter is quite a bit of perfume, and this Mary pours it all over Jesus, at least on his feet, and begins to wipe that with her hair. It's a lot of perfume. It's not just a lot of perfume, but it's expensive perfume. We're going to get into how much it costs. And then she takes her hair. Now, I want you to know something about Hebrew women. They don't take out their hair for just anybody, right? Like it's something that was reserved for their husbands mostly. But I just want you to see the extravagance of her gesture. She's taking her very best, and she's doing it in a way that is, I guess, against what a lot of people would have thought was appropriate at the time. To take out your hair and to wipe Jesus' feet with your hair. She's doing something that even Judas is about to say, why would you do that? But I think that's what Mary's gift or Mary's example shows us, is that when we give to Jesus, we should be able to give extravagantly and without concern about what other people might say about us, right? And the smell, the fragrance of that type of offering will fill the entire room. I wanted to show you a verse out of Ecclesiastes that just says a good name, this is Ecclesiastes chapter 7, a good name is like perfume, right? And that's the idea. Like if you have a good name, then you're sweet smelling, even if you're not really. But if you have a good name, you're sweet smelling. That's the idea, right? And look at how this happens in Mark. In Mark chapter 14, verse 9, what Jesus says about this woman that pours the perfume on Jesus' head, this is what Jesus says about her in verse 9. Truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her. Because what she did is like a pleasing aroma that fills the whole room, right? Very literally, I'm sure, because the houses in that area probably weren't very big, and this is a half a liter of perfume, and she pours it out on Jesus' feet. Very literally, it does the whole room smell, but it's continuing to be a fragrant offering. In fact, we're talking about that smell today. Because that's how important what Mary does is. She gives extravagantly, and she gives in a way that doesn't worry about what people think. And the fragrance of that gift fills the room. But not everybody's happy with it. And I just want to point that out because, let's be honest, well, let's read it. My third point is that Judas pretended to honor the poor, right? In verse 4, it says this, but one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected, why wasn't this perfume sold for money and given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. Now, I just want you to see just how expensive this perfume actually is now, right? A year's wages. Now, a daily wage in the Roman time would have been like 1 denarius. And that's why some of your guys' Bibles might say it's worth 300 denarius, because that's about a year's wages, right? And we often overlook Judas's objection because, well, let's be honest, he's Judas, right? You don't really want to take into consideration to what Judas says. I mean, he's the one that's going to later betray him. Every time John thinks of Judas, he calls him either a devil or a thief, right? Like that John doesn't have much of a good memory about anything good Judas ever did. And maybe he didn't do a lot that was good. But he objects. And I began to think, like, does his objection have any sense of validity? Like, is it something that we should consider? Was her gift too extravagant? Right? Because I don't want to just write it off because Judas is the guy that's used to steal from the money bag. Like, was his complaint legitimate? And I started thinking about how much this was, right? Remember when they were feeding the 5,000, what Simon said? It would take a half of a year's wages to feed all these people, right? That means with Mary's gift, you could feed 10,000 people Wouldn't that be awesome? To be able to feed lunch to 10,000 people, that would be pretty great, right? If you take today's wages, right? And I went with minimum wage in Nevada, which, come on, you guys don't make minimum wage. But I went with minimum wage in Nevada, which is $9.75. If you work 40 hours a week and you work for 52 weeks, you make $20,280. I didn't figure that out of myself. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. $20,280. If that's a day's wages, that's what Mary's perfume cost. Now, maybe it costs more than that in their time, or not. The point is, that's an extravagant gift. Think of all the good that we could do if somebody came in and just dropped $20,280 into the plate. Think of all the homeless that we could feed. Think of all the ministry opportunities that we could have. Now, just imagine that maybe instead of doing that, somebody took a pint of perfume that was worth $20,280 and just poured it out in the middle of church service. And the fragrance of that filled the room. Wouldn't you say, well, wait a second, couldn't you just have spilt half of it? And then maybe the other half give to the poor? Are you really going to use that much money, that much to give to Jesus? See, we overlook the complaint because it's Judas making it. But I think there's value in considering it. But I still think what Jesus says is powerful. See, the poor you're going to have with you always, but him, not so much, right? He's only here for a short time. And so, yeah, we look for opportunities, actively look for opportunities to help the poor, to be open-handed with the poor, right? But that doesn't mean that it's not our opportunities, that we shouldn't be looking for opportunities also to honor Jesus in extravagant ways. We should be willing to do that. We should take pride in coming into our church and seeing that people care in extravagant ways what that church might look like, right? We should care and be willing to honor Jesus because this or whatever opportunity we have is giving to Jesus. So moving on, I want you to see something. Jesus in verse 7 says, "Leave her alone." Jesus replied, "It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of her burial." Day of my burial. I'm all over with words today. The day of my burial. It's intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. And I just was thinking about that, and it seems to imply that God had intended that she was going to use this perfume on this day. Isn't that what the NIV sounds like? That's not, the Greek is not so easy, right? So I want you to see what the New American Standard says, and then look at what the New King James says. Here's what the New American Standard says. It says, "Therefore Jesus said, 'Let her alone so that she may keep it for the day of my burial.'" See, there's no hint that God intended this to be used, right? There's no hint of that there. The King James says it even better. The King James says, "But Jesus said to her, 'Let her alone. She has kept this for the day of my burial.'" And see, here's what I think is going on with this perfume. I think Mary cherished it. I think she kept it for a special time. I don't know where she got it. I don't know if she was just really rich and wealthy, or if it was something that her family had handed down to her that she treasured. I think she looked at that bottle of perfume every day wondering, one of these days, and dreaming of the day that maybe she'll use it on her wedding day, or when her children get married, or heaven forbid, at any time that she might have to bury a loved one, right? And I think she treasured this perfume and kept it because she didn't want to use it. But this night, something so special that was happening that she chose this time to use and to give up her treasure. Right? I think that's what's happening. She chose this time to give over what she had held and dreamed about using one day. And she gets to use it on Jesus. And this perfume that's going to go on Jesus is going to continue to be on his clothes and in his hair and on his feet. It's going to continue to be there so much that when he's on the cross and he's breathing and gasping for air, he's going to get a hint of this perfume and be reminded of the way that Mary honored him. See, I think that's what's going on with Mary. She's an example of what it truly is to honor Jesus, and it's about your motivation. Judas isn't motivated about honoring the poor, is he? No, he's keeper of the money bag. And as keeper of the money bag, you know what he likes to do is pull a little bit out every once in a while. And so this $20,280 gift would have gone a long way if you're the keeper of the money bag. Just think about it. But Jesus quotes Deuteronomy 15:11 to him. And here's what Deuteronomy 15:11 says. There will always be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed toward your fellow Israelites who are poor and needy in your land. Does it sound like what Jesus says? You will always have poor among you. Moses said it. There will always be poor people in the land. Jesus says it. You'll always have poor people among you. And if you don't believe it, go talk to John and head down to fish with him sometimes. Are there poor people in our land? Yes. And even if you take that gift, $20,280, and pour it out and try to help all the poor people that you can, it's not going to make a dent. There's always going to be poor people in the land. Moses said it. Jesus said it. But Jesus adds on to what Moses says. He throws this tagline on it that says, you will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. See, it's about your priorities, right? I do believe, as Moses talks about in Deuteronomy, that you should be open-handed instead of tight-fisted. But it's about your priorities. See, if you go back and read Deuteronomy 15:11 in context, it's about the year of Jubilee, and it's commanding people not to become tight-fisted as the year of Jubilee approaches. Right? Because that's how some people would be. They'd become tight-fisted because they knew, hey, the year of forgiving debts is coming up, so I need to stop loaning out money. And then God says to them, no, don't do that. Always don't be hard-hearted and tight-fisted, but instead be open-handed. Because if you refuse to take care of the poor, they're going to cry out to me, and I'm going to punish you for their sake. But if you do take care of the poor, they're going to cry out, they're going to tell me, and I'm going to bless you for their sake. There's always going to be poor among you, and so you should be open-handed with them. You should look for opportunities to take care of them. But it's about priorities, and it's about motivation. In Deuteronomy, their motivation, he was telling them, don't be motivated by trying to save a buck. Be motivated by being generous. If I look at Judas, his motivation was, what can I get out of the money bag? If I look at Mary, her motivation is, what can I give to Jesus? Right? It's about motivation. And Mary gives in a way that's motivated out of a pure heart. She takes what she had valued and treasured and saved and kept for just a perfect time, and she pours it out on Jesus' feet, because that's the way that we are to honor Jesus. It's just a reminder to us as we look at these two women that they are examples. And there's so many godly examples out there, isn't there? And if we were to just like devalue women to such a point that we say, oh yeah, they don't matter, then we're missing all these godly examples. We're missing, in fact, the first example that John shows us of what true discipleship is, what it means to honor Jesus, as we see Martha serving and Mary pouring out her treasure on Jesus' feet. And it's a reminder to us not just to look at their example, but also follow their example. Be willing to honor Jesus. Now, as we continue in John, you're going to see that the tension comes back. Verse 9, a large crowd of Jews found Jesus where Jesus was there, and came not only because of him, but also because of Lazarus, who he raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well, for on account of him, many Jews were going over to Jesus and believing in him. So John ends the chapter just by showing us, like, Jesus' death is approaching. Like, the Passover's coming, conflict is happening. It's okay, though, because his followers are going to continue to show devotion and honor him as this week continues. And so we'll learn more from their examples too. But tonight we learned from Mary and Martha, and they're great examples of what it means to be disciples.